Just a decade ago, building a website with advanced visuals, especially 3D elements, was a task reserved for expert developers with deep knowledge of WebGL or heavy frameworks. It was complex, time-consuming, and far from beginner-friendly. But today, with the incredible power of tools like React, Tailwind CSS, and modern 3D platforms, you can create a fully interactive, visually stunning gaming website, even if you're just starting your journey in web development. In this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through how to build a professional-level gaming website, step by step, with clean, responsive layouts, animated UI, and immersive 3D visuals, all using React and Tailwind CSS. Whether you're building your portfolio, learning by doing, or simply curious how modern game websites are created, this video is made for you. Beginner-friendly, no shortcuts, and packed with practical techniques you can actually use. So, get ready, because by the end of this video, you won't just be watching cool effects, you'll be building them yourself. Smash that like button and hit subscribe if you found this helpful. Your support keeps this channel growing and the content coming. All right, team, as always, we're starting completely from scratch. First things first, let's create a new folder on your desktop or wherever you like. Now, drag and drop that empty folder into your favorite code editor. For me, that's VS Code, but you can use whatever you like. Next up, let's open Google and search for Tailwind CSS. Click on the official Tailwind website. It should be the first result. Now, up at the top left, click on that version dropdown and let's switch it to a previous version because sometimes newer versions have breaking changes, and for this tutorial, we'll stick to a stable, familiar version. Now use the search bar at the top of the Tailwind website and search for Vite. You should see a result saying install Tailwind CSS with Vite. Click on that. Perfect. Now we're on the guide page. The first thing it shows us is a command to create a new project using Vite. Copy that command. All right, now open the terminal in your code editor. Paste that command you copied, but we don't want Vite to create a new folder inside our gaming website folder. We want all our files to live directly inside the folder we already created. So when we run the command after Vite at latest, add / like this, npm create Vite at latest /. This / just means, hey, create the project inside the current folder. The terminal will now ask us a few things. 1, package name. Just press Tab to accept default and Enter. 2, select a framework. Move down and select React. 3, select a variant. Choose JavaScript, not TypeScript. And that's it. Now, one last setup step. Run this command, npm install. This installs all the dependencies that Vite and React need to get the project running. Wait for a few seconds while it installs everything. Now, Vite has automatically created a project structure for us. Let's break it down. Index.html. This is the main HTML file, the starting point of our app. React will inject itself into a div inside this file. Package.json. This keeps track of all the dependencies and scripts we're using. If we install libraries like Tailwind or React Router later, they'll show up here. Vite.config. This is the Vite configuration file. Node modules. This folder is hidden by default. This is where npm installs all the packages, React, Vite, etc. You never manually edit this folder. Public folder. This is for static assets like images, icons, or anything you want served as is. The source folder is where the majority of our development will take place. Within this folder, we already have main.jsx. This file is responsible for initializing React and mounting it to the DOM. App.jsx. This is our primary React component, essentially serving as the home page or the entry point of the application for now. All right, moving on. The next step is to install Tailwind CSS into our Vite project. Here, you'll see there are 2 important commands we need in order to set up Tailwind properly. The first command is used to install 3 essential packages into our project. First, it installs Tailwind CSS, which is the main library providing all the utility classes we'll be using. Second, it installs PostCSS, which is a tool that helps Tailwind process and transform our CSS behind the scenes. And third, it installs AutoPrefixer, which automatically adds the necessary vendor prefixes so our styles are compatible with all modern browsers. After that, we have the second command. This command is used to initialize Tailwind inside our project. Now let's go ahead and copy both of those commands. Open the terminal, Paste them in and hit enter. Let's give it a few seconds to finish installing. Once that's done, you'll see that the two configuration files have been created for us. That means Tailwind has been successfully initialized. Now we need to configure the template paths, so Tailwind knows where to look for our class names. To do this, we'll open the Tailwind configuration file. Inside, you'll see some default content. Let's go ahead and delete everything inside that file. Next, we'll copy the updated configuration from the Tailwind documentation and paste it in. Once that's done, the final step is to set up our main CSS file to work with Tailwind. Inside the SRC folder, you'll find a file called index.css. Let's open it up and, just like before, delete everything inside to start fresh. Then, we'll copy 3 simple Tailwind directives and paste them into the file. These directives are what bring in Tailwind's base styles, reusable components, and all its utility classes. All right, now that we've set up Tailwind CSS, it's time to run our project and make sure everything is working properly. To do that, let's open our terminal and run the command that starts the development server. Once you run it, you'll see a local server link appear in the terminal. Simply hold Control and click on the link to open up the online version of your project in your browser. Perfect. If everything is working fine, you should see your basic React app running. Now, let's move forward and open up the app.jsx file. Let's open it up and, just like before, delete everything inside to start fresh. Inside this file, we'll type something called React arrow function component export. Just a quick explanation. This is a shortcut that automatically generates a functional component structure for us, saving a lot of typing. Now, if this shortcut doesn't work when you type it, don't worry. It just means you don't have the ES7 Plus React Redux React Native snippets extension installed yet. To fix that, simply open the Extensions panel from the left-hand dashboard of your code editor, search for ES7 Plus React Snippets, and install it. Once that's installed, your shortcut will start working like magic. All right, with that in place, let's add a few quick styles to test if Tailwind CSS is properly wired into our project. Inside our main div, we're going to add a class name that increases the text size dramatically and changes the text color to red. Once you add these classes, if you hover over them inside your editor, you should see a little pop-up showing you the actual CSS that Tailwind is applying. It's super handy. If you don't see these pop-ups showing Tailwind styles, again, no worries. You probably don't have the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense extension installed yet. Just like before, go into your Extensions panel, search for Tailwind CSS IntelliSense, and install it. It makes working with Tailwind so much easier by offering auto-completion and style previews right inside your editor. And that's it. With these steps, our project is now completely set up and ready for building. Before we jump into designing our gaming website, let's clean things up a bit. Inside the SRC folder, go ahead and delete the app.css file. We won't need it because we'll be styling everything directly with Tailwind classes. Now, to get our project assets ready, we'll need some images and video files. To stay organized, let's head into the public folder. Inside public, create a new folder and name it Images. Then, create another new folder and name it Videos. Once those folders are ready, you can download all the images and videos you need from the GitHub repository. The link is right below in the description box. While you're there, if you find the project helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a star on GitHub. It's a small thing that really helps support the project and keeps the tutorials coming. Inside the GitHub repository, you'll find 2 folders, one for images and one for videos. Just download the contents of both folders and move the images into your new images folder and the videos into your videos folder inside the public directory. And there we go. Now everything is fully set up. All right, moving on to the next step. Let's head over to our source folder, usually labeled as SRC, and inside it, we're going to create a brand new folder called Components. This is where we'll organize all of the components that will make up our website. It helps keep everything nice and clean as our project grows. Inside the Components folder, let's create our very first component file. We're going to call it header.jsx because this one will handle the header section of our gaming website. Now inside this new header file, we'll use a handy shortcut. We'll type rfc and hit enter. It quickly generates a simple, clean React component structure for us. In the latest versions of React, you no longer need to manually import React at the top of every component. So if you see that line automatically added, go ahead and delete it. We don't need it anymore. Now that our header component is ready, we need to bring it into our app.jsx file and use it. First, inside app.jsx, let's clean things up a little. We'll change the current div into an empty div. This div will act as the single root element, and inside it, we'll place all of our components. This is important because in React, a component must always return only one root element. If you don't do this, React will throw an error. Next, let's import our header from the components folder. Once imported, we can simply drop the header component inside our main div. And just like that, we've added our first real component to the project. Before we actually start designing our header though, let's quickly set up some basic global styles for the project. To do that, open up the index.css file. This is the same file where we already added the Tailwind directives earlier. Now, below those Tailwind directives, we're going to define some base styles for the entire body of our website using Tailwind's layering system. We're going to set the background color to black, set the text color to white, set the font family to a nice clean sans serif, make sure the body takes up the full screen height, and prevent horizontal scrolling by hiding any overflow on the x-axis. By doing this, we ensure that our project has a solid, clean foundation. All right, now it's time to actually start building out our header. Let's navigate over to our header.jsx file where we set up our component earlier. First thing, go ahead and delete that placeholder div we had there. Instead, we're going to create a real HTML5 header element. Inside this header, we're going to split things into two parts. We'll have a left section and a right section. Let's start with the left section first. Inside the header, create a new div element. This div is going to hold our logo. To add the logo, we'll use an image element. We already have a logo PNG file sitting inside the images folder in the public directory. So to link it properly, just right-click on the logo, copy the relative path, and paste that into the source attribute of the image. The logo shows up way too large on the page. Let's fix that by adding some Tailwind classes to resize it nicely. We'll make it smaller on small screens and slightly larger on medium-sized screens to keep everything responsive and clean. Next, below the image element, create another div element. This div will contain two buttons for our header. Inside it, create the first button with the text "Play Now" inside. Let's add a class name to this button and set the following styles for it. H8 to set the height of the button to 2 rem, which makes it a nice small button. PX6 to give it padding left and right so the button looks wider and more clickable. BG gradient to R applies a back gradient that goes from left to right, from purple 500 to indigo 600. Makes the gradient color start from a bright purple and end at a deep indigo blue. Rounded LG gives it rounded corners to make it look softer and more modern. Font medium makes the text a little bolder so it's easy to read. Text now wrap means the text will stay in one line and won't break to a second line if the button gets smaller. Hover opacity 70 adds a hover effect, so when the user hovers over the button, it becomes slightly transparent, which gives a nice interactive feel. Transition all duration 300 makes the hover effect smooth by animating it over 300 milliseconds. Great. Now to create the second button, simply just copy this first one and paste it below. But this time, change its gradient colors. Instead of purple and indigo, we want to make it a gray gradient. So you can set it from gray-400 to gray 600. This will make the second button feel different, but still keep the same size and style. Now let's add some style to the container div of our buttons. So we'll use a class name and add the following styles. Hidden, which simply means by default this div will be hidden on small devices. MD Flex, so starting from medium screen sizes, This div will turn into a flex container and the buttons will sit next to each other. Gap 5 gives some space between the buttons, making them look clean and organized. And item center makes sure that both buttons are vertically centered inside the div. Now let's move on and also style our left section. So for the left section's div, add a class name and apply these styles. Flex, again, so the elements inside will be lined up side by side. LG gap 14 gives a bigger gap between the elements when the screen is large, so everything looks more spaced out on bigger monitors. Gap 4 applies a smaller gap for small and medium screens to keep it compact. And again, items center to vertically center everything nicely inside this left section. We also need to add styles to the header element itself. So let's add this class name, ply1 for a little padding on the top and bottom, px7 to add padding on the left and right sides, flex to make it a flex container so the left and right sections sit side by side, justify between to push the left section to the start and the right section to the end, items center to align everything vertically centered, sticky top 0 so that the header will stick at the top even when we scroll down, Z50 to make sure it stays on top of all other elements, W full to make it stretch across the entire width of the page. Border B means we're adding a very thin border just to the bottom, 0.3 pixels thick. Sets the color of that bottom border to a light purple. Together it gives a soft, clean underline that looks modern and not too heavy. Great, now let's create the right section of our header. We're going to create a nav element. This nav bar will contain 4 anchor tags, and each anchor will have one icon plus one text label representing different sections of the page. So let's start by creating the first anchor tag. Inside it, we'll add an icon. You can actually use any icon library you want, like React icons, for example. But for this project, I'm going to use icons from boxicon.com. So open your Google, search for boxicon.com, and once you're on their website, look at the top right section where it says Usage, and click on it. Here you should see an installation command that says Install via npm. Just copy this command, but make sure not to copy the $ in front of it. Then head back to your code editor, open your terminal, and first stop the project from running by pressing Ctrl and C together. After that, paste the command you just copied and press Enter to run it and install Boxicons into your project. Once that's done, type npm run dev to start your project again and open the provided local server link to view your project live. Now, in order to use the icons from Boxicons inside our React project, we need to import the Boxicons CSS file at the top of the component where we want to use the icons. So at the very top, let's add this line, import boxicons/css boxicons.min CSS. Awesome. Now head back to the Boxicons website, go to their homepage, and in the search bar, look for a user icon. Select the icon you like, and make sure you choose the font option, not the SVG one, because the font option gives us the correct HTML code we need. Then copy that little piece of code they give you, head back to your code editor, and paste it inside the first anchor tag. Right after the icon, type the word avatar as the label text. Now, if we go back and refresh our project page, we can see that the icon appears nicely with the label beside it. Perfect. Now let's add some styles and hover effects to this anchor tag. We'll give it a class name and apply the following styles. Relative sets the anchor tag's position so that the after element we'll add later can be positioned properly. Py1 gives a little padding on top and bottom to space it nicely. Text LD makes the text a bit larger for better visibility. Hover text purple changes the text color to a light purple when we hover over it. Transition colors and duration 300 make that color change smooth over 300 milliseconds. Then we're using a special trick. Aft creates an invisible after element. After absolute positions it inside our anchor exactly where we want. After W0 and after H0.5, set its starting width to 0 and height to half a pixel, super thin like a line. After BG purple 400 gives the line a purple color. After left and after bottom 0, anchor it to the bottom left. After transition all makes any changes to this line animate smoothly. And hover after W full says that when we hover, that little invisible line should expand across the full width, like a cool underline effect. Finally, text now wrap makes sure the text doesn't wrap to a second line. Looks great, right? Now, instead of repeating all of that from scratch to create the next 3 links, we simply copy this anchor tag and paste it 3 more times right under each other. And for each one, change the icon to a different one that fits your sections and update the label text according to what each link represents. Nice. Now that we have fixed all of our anchor tags, let's move on and add some styles to the nav element itself. Add a class name and apply the following styles. Hidden by default, then show it as a flexbox when the screen size hits medium. And also add some gap between each anchor, a bigger gap on large screens and a smaller gap on medium screens. Great. Now this nav bar is perfect, but only for big tablets and desktop devices. For mobile devices, we will have a separate sidebar that the user can open and close with a menu icon. So scroll down the code and right below the nav element, let's define our sidebar setup. Start by creating a button. This button will hold a menu icon. We'll grab the menu icon from Boxicons again. So open boxicons.com, search for a menu icon, choose the one you like, click on font, copy the provided code, and paste it inside the button element. Then let's add a class name to this button. Make the text size 3XL, give it some padding of 2, and also hide it on screens bigger than medium because we only want the menu button to show on smaller devices. Awesome. Now right below this button, let's create the sidebar itself. Create a new div, and inside this div, create a nav element. Instead of writing the nav content from scratch, just copy the 4 anchor tags we already created for the desktop nav and paste them inside this mobile nav. Make sure to indent them properly so it stays clean and readable. Now let's style this mobile nav. Give it a flex display, set the direction to column, add a nice gap of 4 between the links, and center all the items nicely. Then let's fix the positioning of the sidebar by styling the main div. Make its position fixed so it stays in place. Set top to 14, right and left to 0. Give it a black background and add a padding of 5 to space things out. Finally, make sure that when the screen size is bigger than medium, we hide this whole sidebar so it only shows for mobile users. Next step is to add 2 buttons to our mobile sidebar. So scroll down the code and right below the nav element, create a new div. Inside this div, we're going to create our first button. Type some text inside this button. Then let's give this button some basic styles by adding a class name. Set the background color to purple, add some padding on the top and bottom, and make the corners rounded for a nice smooth look. Great, now let's move on to the second button. For this one, set the text inside it to say NFT Store. Apply the exact same styles as the previous button so they match perfectly, but just change the background color from purple to gray. Now, to make these 2 buttons sit nicely together, we need to add some styles to the container div that is holding them. Give it a class name and set it to display as a flexbox in column direction. Add a gap of 3 between the buttons, make it take the full width of the parent, and push it a little down by adding a top margin of 4. Looks great. Now we need this sidebar to display only when the user clicks on the menu button, and it must get closed again when the user clicks the menu button a second time. To make this simple toggle happen, first scroll up to the main container div of our sidebar. In the class name, hide it by default by adding the hidden class so it's not showing when the page first loads. Then, give this div an ID, and let's call it mobile menu. Make sure you use camel case so it's easy to grab later with JavaScript. Great. Now scroll up in our file right above the return statement. Here, we'll create our functionality, basically a small function that will show and hide the sidebar when the menu button is clicked. We'll keep it simple and beginner-friendly. First, right above our return statement, we define a new function and call it toggle mobile menu. Inside this function, the first thing we do is grab our sidebar element. Remember, we gave it the ID of mobile menu. We use document.getElementById to select it and store it inside a variable called mobile menu. Great, now we check if this element already has the hidden class. So we say, if mobile menu.classList contains hidden, that means it's currently hidden. And in that case, we want to remove the hidden class to make it visible. But if it's already visible, meaning it does not have the hidden class anymore, we simply add the hidden class back to hide it again. So basically, every time the user clicks the menu button, this function will flip between showing and hiding the sidebar. Now that we have our toggle mobile menu function ready, we need a way to actually trigger it when the user clicks the menu button. To do that, scroll down to the button where we placed our menu icon. That's the button right above our mobile sidebar div. Inside this button element, we add a small property called onClick. So we type onClick equals toggle mobile menu, just like that, no parentheses because we only want to reference the function, not run it immediately. This way, when the user clicks the menu button, it will call the toggle mobile menu function, and that function will either show or hide the sidebar, depending on its current state. That's it. Now you have a fully working, super beginner-friendly sidebar toggle for mobile screens. Great job so far. Keep going. It's getting exciting. This was everything for our header section. It's looking great. Now let's move on and start building our hero section. First, inside the components folder, we'll create a new file and name it hero.jsx. Inside this new file, type RAFCE. That's the shortcut to quickly create a basic functional component. Now, let's import our new hero component inside the app.jsx file. At the top, we import the hero from the components folder, and then inside our main div, we place the hero component right underneath the header. Great. Now back inside our hero.jsx file, let's start building this exciting section. First thing, delete the default div and replace it with a main element. We'll add a class name to this main and apply these styles. Relative. This means the main element will be positioned relative to itself. Next, we set wfull, which simply means the main element will stretch across the full width of the screen. Then, hscreen, this makes our main element take up the full height of the user's screen. After that, we add overflow hidden. This hides anything that goes outside the main container. Now we add flex. Then we use justify center. This makes sure that anything inside this main element is horizontally centered. Finally, we set MB 10%. This adds a margin at the bottom of the main section. This sets up a full screen container that's flexible and ready for our content. Inside the main element, let's add a video element. Now, to set the video source, we go to the public folder, find the videos folder, and there's a file called hero.mp4. Right-click on it, copy its relative path, and paste that path into the src attribute of the video. After that, we'll add a few important attributes to the video tag: autoplay, loop, muted, and plays inline, so that the video plays automatically in the background without sound and stays looped. If we now preview the page, we'll notice that something is off. The background of the header is not looking right anymore. No worries. To fix that quickly, jump back into the header component and update its styles. Make sure the header background is black and change its position from fixed to sticky so it behaves nicely when we scroll. Perfect. Now back to the hero section. Let's style the video properly. We add a class name to the video and apply these styles. This makes sure the video fully covers the background area and stays nicely in position behind our main content. Now, before we move on to the next parts, let's quickly disable the autoplay and loop attributes for now because we'll set up the final behavior later. So right below the video element, let's create a new div. This div is going to group together our image and heading text so they stay organized and easy to style later. Inside this div, first we add an image element. To set the source for this image, we go to the public folder. Then inside the images folder, find the file called elu.text.png. We just right-click it, copy its relative path, and paste it inside the sarc attribute of our image. Awesome. Now to make sure the image looks good on all screen sizes, we'll add a class name. For medium and larger screens, we set MDW30rem, making it 30 rems wide. But for smaller screens, we use W20rem, so it's a bit smaller and fits nicely on mobile. Then, right below the image, we create an H1 element. This H1 will have the text Explore, Capture, Conquer. Now let's style the H1 too by adding a class name. We set MD Text 2XL, which means on medium screens and bigger, the font size will be extra large, and Text 1XL for smaller screens, so it stays a little smaller and looks better on mobile. Finally, we add font bold to make the text stand out and feel strong and confident. Right under the H1 element, we'll add a thin line to visually separate the heading from the rest of the content. To do this, create a new div, an empty one, and apply these styles. MD 75% for medium and larger screens, and W 60% for smaller screens. Set the height with H 0.1, making it extremely thin, just enough to suggest a separation without being distracting. Give it a soft gray background using BG. Before moving further, let's position and size the main container div that holds all these elements. Set its position to absolute, allowing it to float freely inside the parent main element. Position it from the bottom with bottom 15%, so it sits nicely above the lower edge of the viewport. Make it a flex container with flex and flex call to stack its children vertically. Use items center to horizontally center its content. Add gap 5 to create consistent vertical spacing between each child element. Now we'll add a button. Instead of building a new one, we'll reuse the button from the header component. Open header.jsx, locate the button, and copy it. Paste it inside the main container div right below the line we just created. After pasting, slightly adjust the button's size to better suit the hero section. Increase the button's height from H8 to H10. Expand its horizontal padding to PX16, making it larger and easier to interact with, especially on mobile. Right below the button we just added, we'll create a new div element. Inside this div, the first element will be an img. This will display our game logo. Locate the ilulogo.png file inside the public/images folder. Copy its relative path and paste it inside the sarc attribute of the img element. Since the logo will initially appear too large, we'll adjust its size. Add a class name to the img element. Set its height to MDH16 for medium and larger screens. Set it to H12 for smaller screens to maintain responsiveness without overwhelming the design. Next, we'll add text alongside the logo. Right after the img tag, still inside the same div, insert the desired text. To properly align the logo and text side by side, we style the parent div, apply flex to lay them out horizontally. Use item center to vertically center the content. Add gap 5 to create space between the logo and the text. For the text itself, apply these styles. Text-3XL to make it large and visually strong. Font extra bold to emphasize its importance. Text gray 200 to give it a soft complementary color that fits the overall theme. Finally, we'll add a paragraph right below this logo text section. Create a P tag and insert the paragraph content inside it. To style the paragraph, use max W 80% to control the width and keep the text easily readable. Apply text center to center align it, providing a soft purple tone that matches the design's aesthetic. With these steps completed, this section of the hero is polished, clean, responsive, and consistent with the overall layout. Now let's add a scroll down indicator to the hero section to signal that more content is available below. First, we create a main div to hold the entire scroll indicator structure. Inside this main div, add a second nested div. Then inside that, add a third div. This triple nesting will give us better control over positioning and animation. Within the innermost div, we create the animated dot. Set a very small width using W1. Give it a slightly taller height with H3, forming a slim vertical shape. Set the background color to a soft purple to match the site's color scheme. Apply rounded full to fully round its edges, giving it a pill-like appearance. Add animate pulse to create a smooth breathing effect, subtly expanding and contracting to attract attention. Now, moving one level up to the dots container div, we style it. Set a fixed width and height using W8 and H12. Add a border 2 with the same purple color. Apply rounded full to make the entire container a smooth capsule shape. Use flex and justify center to center the dot horizontally. Add PT1 to push the dot downwards slightly inside the capsule for better visual balance. Finally, for the outermost main div, set its position to absolute and place it at the bottom using bottom 40. Move it horizontally. LG right 24 on large screens, right 5 on smaller screens. Add MT24 to create extra spacing above the indicator. Apply animate bounce to give the entire indicator a gentle bouncing animation. Control its visibility with SM inline block hidden, ensuring it is hidden on very small screens but visible from small SEM screens and larger. The next step is to add a text label to the scroll down indicator. We'll add it inside the second layer div, right below the div that holds the tiny animated dot. Before we insert the text, assign a class name to the second layer div. Use flex call item center so its child elements are stacked vertically and centered horizontally. Now, inside this second layer div, create a new p tag. Add the text scroll down. Style the text with the same soft purple color to stay consistent with the overall theme. Add a top margin with MT2 to create space between the scroll indicator and the text. With that, the scroll down indicator is fully complete, both visually and functionally clean. Next, let's activate the autoplay and loop settings for the background video. Now that the hero section is finalized, we can move on to building the next part of the page. Inside the components folder, create a new file and name it characters.jsx. This will be the starting point for constructing the characters section of the site. Inside the new component we just created, the very first thing we do, as always, is quickly type out RAFCE. Now, before we build anything inside this new component, we have to make sure it's actually connected and showing up in our app. To do that, we head over to our app.jsx file, and at the top, we import the characters component we just created. Then, scrolling down to the return part of our app, we simply add our new characters component right below where we have the hero component. Awesome. With that done, we can now see our new section loading into the page. With everything linked correctly, we jump back into characters.jsx, and this is where the real fun begins. This next section is honestly one of the most exciting parts of the entire project. It's also a little more challenging compared to what we've built so far, but don't worry because I've broken everything down carefully to make it super simple to follow, even if you're just starting out. So, without wasting any more time, let's dive right in and start building something truly awesome together. First, inside our characters component, we already have a basic div ready to go. We're going to use this div as the main container for our entire characters section. To set it up properly, we start by adding a class name that defines its layout and behavior. We make it relative so that any absolutely positioned elements inside will have this container as their reference point. We set it to full width with W full, allowing it to stretch across the entire screen. We set the height to fill the full screen. We apply overflow hidden, making sure that if anything inside tries to go outside the boundaries, it gets hidden cleanly. Finally, we give it a bottom margin with MB 10%, adding some nice spacing before the next section starts. With the container ready, the first thing we want inside this section is a title, something clear that tells users exactly what this part of the page is about. So inside our main container, we create another div. Inside that, we add an H1 element with the text fighters. Now let's style this title to make it visually striking. We set the font size to text 5XL, making it big and hard to miss. We make the font bold with font bold to give it strength and impact. We increase the spacing between the letters using tracking widest, creating a more dramatic and spacious look. For the margins, we want it to behave slightly differently depending on the screen size. On medium screens and up, we pull the title closer to the next element with a negative bottom margin using MDMB-14. On smaller screens, we keep it cleaner with a normal bottom margin of MB8. To make the title even cooler and help it pop off the background, we manually add a soft text shadow. We do this with an inline style, setting a gentle white glow that softly surrounds the text, making it stand out beautifully without overpowering the design. And finally, we make sure the title is centered and sitting on top of everything else visually. We give the wrapping div a relative position. We set a z-index of 10 to lift it above any other layers. We add a little top padding with PT6 to push the title slightly downward, and we use text center to align it perfectly in the middle of the screen. All right, so we just finished setting up the title for the characters section. Now, right below that title div, we're going to create another div. This new div will be the main content area of our characters section, the space where we'll organize everything like avatars, animations, and user interactions. First, we add a class name to this main content container and style it carefully. We set it to relative so that any absolutely positioned child elements will be correctly placed inside this space, making sure it sits visually above any background elements. We set it to flex. Then we apply responsive behavior using MD flex row flex call. That means on medium screens and larger, the items will line up horizontally in a row. On smaller screens, they'll stack vertically like a column, keeping everything responsive and user-friendly. We add items center to center all child elements vertically within the container. We set W full so it stretches across the full width available, and H full to fill the full height of its parent container. Finally, we add P4, giving it a little padding all around, making sure nothing is crammed against the edges. To double check that all of these styles are working properly, we quickly add a temporary background color, something like a simple white background. Once we're confident that everything looks clean and structured correctly, we simply remove the temporary background color to keep the final design polished. Perfect. Now let's move on. We're going to create another div. This new div will become the left side of our layout. This side is where we'll display the avatar information and the selection cards. We give this left side div a class name and apply the following styles. We set it to W full, meaning on smaller screens, it will take up the full width to stay mobile friendly. So on medium and larger screens, it will take up half the width, creating a clean side-by-side layout. We use flex call to arrange its child elements vertically, stacking them one after another. And we add left margin on medium and larger screens, providing breathing room from the edge or any other content next to it. Now, inside this left side div, the first thing we're going to build is the selected avatar info card. This will be the section that shows the avatar's details in a clean and visually appealing way. To create it, we add another div dedicated to this info card. We give it a background color of BG Gray 980, which is a dark gray with 80% opacity, allowing a subtle bit of the background to show through. We use Backdrop Blur Sim to apply a soft blur effect to the background behind the card, giving it a modern, slightly frosted glass look. We apply Rounded Edge to soften the corners, making the card feel more welcoming. P4 adds padding inside the card so that the content doesn't feel cramped against the edges. MB4 adds margin at the bottom. We add a thin border using Border Gray 800, giving the card a nice, subtle outline. And finally, we apply shadow, a soft purple glow around the card that makes it gently pop off the background without being too aggressive. And just like that, our info card is fully styled and ready to hold all the avatar information we'll present to the user. So far, we've built our avatar info card. Now it's time to make that card actually useful by adding the stats. the real traits that define a fighter. We're going to start with power and build it right. First things first, we need a wrapper, a container that will hold all our stats stacked neatly on top of each other. We create a new div, and we apply two important styles to it. Space Y3, this adds vertical space between each stat line, so everything feels clean and easy to scan. MB16, this gives us room at the bottom, spacing the stat block away from whatever content comes next. With that wrapper in place, we now begin building our very first stat block, power. We create another div, which will be the block that contains both the stat label and the visual bar. We want to arrange its contents horizontally, so we set it to flex. We also apply item center to make sure everything inside this stat line is perfectly vertically aligned. Now, inside this stat block, the first thing we add is a span element. This is our label, and in this case, it simply says power. To keep all our stats looking consistent, we give it a fixed width using W24. We also style it with a light gray color, keeping it modern, subtle, and easy on the eyes. Right next to the label, we add our visual stat bar, the part that shows how much power the avatar actually has. This bar is created with another div, and it acts as the background of the stat meter. We style this bar with the following: flex 1, so it stretches to fill all the remaining horizontal space in the row. H4 to make it a sleek, short bar. Not too tall, just enough to catch the eye. BG Gray 800 for a dark, muted background that sets the stage for the filled value. Rounded full to make the bar edges fully pill-shaped. And overflow hidden so that anything we place inside stays perfectly clipped within the round edges. Now, inside this background bar, we add one more div, and this one is where the magic happens. This is the filled bar, the part that visually represents how much power this avatar has. We give it a full height so it completely fills the container vertically, and then we apply a gradient that runs from violet to white, starting with rich purple on the left and fading into white on the right. It's a simple but powerful way to visualize the stat. Awesome, we've just finished building our first stat line, and now it's time to keep that momentum going by adding more stats using the exact same structure. Instead of rebuilding the structure from scratch for each new stat, we copy the entire block we created for power, everything, the container, the label, the bar, and we paste it right below. Once it's pasted, we only change the label text. So instead of power, we change it to say stable. That's it. The layout, the spacing, it all stays the same. Clean, consistent, and super efficient. Now let's do that again. We copy the stable stat, paste it underneath, and this time we simply update the label from stable to penetrate. No need to change anything else. The structure remains identical. And finally, let's do that one more time. Copy the penetrate block, paste it down one more time, and change the label to portable. And just like that, we now have 4 well-aligned stat rows, each showing a unique attribute, yet all visually consistent with each other. Clean, readable, and effective. That wraps up the avatar stats section. Now, let's move on and add 2 action buttons right below the stats. First, we create a new div. This will act as the container for both buttons, helping us manage spacing and layout easily. Inside this container, we start with our first button. The text on this button will be proficient. Then we apply a few Tailwind styles to make the button look sharp and aligned with our theme. We use padding on the X and Y axes so the button feels comfortable and clickable. We give it a deep violet background to match the palette. We make the text white for clear contrast. Add rounded corners to soften the shape and modernize the design. Apply a slightly bolder font for readability. And finally, we add a hover effect, reducing the opacity just a bit on hover with a smooth transition so it feels natural and polished. Once that's done, we create the second button in the easiest way possible. Just copy the first one, paste it right below, and change the text from proficient to redemption. No extra styling work, no extra configuration. Next, we are going to create two cards for our avatars. Each card will represent a different character, and when the user clicks on a card, it will display that avatar's information. The process to set this up is actually super simple, so don't worry. First, scroll down to right below the info board section, where we listed the avatar stats and buttons. Before we build out the visual cards, we need to set up the logic that controls which avatar is currently selected and what data should be shown based on that selection. So let's scroll up to the top of our component, just before the return statement, and write a few lines of logic to prepare for this interactivity. First, we need a way to track which avatar is currently selected. For that, we'll use React's built-in useState hook. As you start typing useState, your editor should help by auto-importing it. If it doesn't, no worries, just import it manually at the top. We create a state variable called selectedAvatar, and we set its initial value to Vicky. This means that when the page first loads, Vicky is the default avatar being displayed. We no longer need to import React explicitly, so let's go ahead and remove that line. Also, be sure to double-check your code at this stage. Even a small typo can lead to frustrating and hard-to-diagnose errors. Next, we define the actual avatar data. To keep things clean and organized, we create a plain object called avatar. Inside this object, we define two avatars, one named Vicky and one named Eva. Each avatar has its own set of attributes: name, power, stable, penetrate, portable, and stars. These match the stat categories we already built into our UI earlier. What makes this part really meaningful is that the values are different between the two avatars. For example, maybe Evia has higher power, while Vicky is more stable. This creates contrast and personality between the characters and gives users a reason to explore and compare. Now, to connect the selected avatar with the correct data, we create a new variable called currentAvatar. We set it equal to avatar selected avatar. And what this line does is simple but powerful. Whatever avatar is currently selected, whether it's Vicky or EVA, this line dynamically grabs that avatar's data from the object and feeds it directly into the UI. That's all we need to set up the logic: simple state, structured data, and one dynamic lookup. All right, now that we've successfully set up the logic to dynamically change avatar information based on which character is currently selected, it's time to bring that logic to life in the UI. So let's scroll down to the part of our JSX where we've already built the selected avatar info card. That's the section that displays all the stats. Inside that container, the first thing we're going to do is add an H1 element. This heading will display the name of the currently selected avatar, and we'll pull that directly from the current avatar object we set up earlier. When rendered, this name will appear at the top left corner of the info card, making it immediately clear who's currently selected. To make the heading feel intentional and well integrated into the design, we'll style it with a larger font size, bold text, and a little space beneath it. Now let's turn our attention to the power stat line, specifically that colorful line we built earlier to visually show the avatar's strength. Right now, that line is static, but we're going to change that. Instead of hard-coding the width, we want the line's length to reflect the actual power level of the currently selected avatar. To make that happen, we dynamically bind the width using an inline style. We pull the value from currentAvatar.power and append a % symbol to it. That way, we're setting the width based directly on the avatar's data, and the visual bar will scale automatically. This creates a smooth, responsive effect and gives the user instant visual feedback about each avatar's strength. And to make this stat line even more informative, we're going to show the actual power number next to the visual bar. Right below the line, we add a small span element that displays the power value. Again, coming straight from current avatar.power. To ensure everything stays readable and clean, we add a little left margin so it doesn't hug the edge of the bar. And that's it. Now we have a stat that's both visual and numerical. Now that we've connected our power stat to real data and made it responsive to avatar selection, it's time to bring that same dynamic behavior to the rest of the stats. Starting with stable, we scroll down to the second stat block in our UI. Just like we did with power, we go into the inner colored bar, the part that visually fills up based on value. Instead of hard-coding the width, we dynamically set it using inline styles, pulling from current avatar.stable. We add the percent symbol to scale it just like before. This way, each character feels unique, and the user instantly sees the difference with just one click. Right below the bar, we add another small span element, just like we did for power. Inside that, we display the numeric value from current avatar.stable, and we add a bit of spacing to keep the layout clean. That's two stats done, and now let's do the same thing for penetrate. We scroll to the third stat block, find the visual bar inside, and update the width dynamically using current avatar.penetrate. And again, we place the numeric value right below the bar with a bit of margin to the side. And finally, we move down to the last stat, portable. Same steps here. We go to the inner bar, bind the width dynamically to current avatar.portable, and then add the small span right below, displaying the actual numeric value from the data. With that, all four stat lines, power, stable, penetrate, and portable, are now fully responsive and tied directly to the selected avatar's data. Every time a user clicks on a different avatar card, all the stats update instantly and automatically. That means we're now going to visually build the avatar cards themselves and connect them to the logic we already set up. To get started, scroll down just below the avatar statistics section. This is where we'll place the visual cards for our two avatars, Vicky and Eva. These cards will serve as interactive buttons. When a user clicks on one of them, the main info section above updates with that avatar's details. So first, we need a container div to hold both of our cards. To set this up, give the container a class name and apply a few Tailwind utility classes. We'll use grid to turn it into a grid layout, grid cols 2 so that we have two equal columns, and gap 4 to give us some space between the cards. Now let's create the first card for Vicky. Inside the container, create a new div. This will represent the actual card. We want it to look stylish, slightly transparent, and modern. So we'll use a dark background with a bit of opacity by using BG Grashed 900/70, then apply a subtle blur behind the card using backdrop blur sem. We also want the card to look slightly rounded and padded inside, so we'll use rounded LG for the corners and P3 to give it some padding. For structure, we make it flexible using Flex, and we handle responsiveness by displaying its content in a row layout on large screens with LG Flex Row, and stacking them vertically on smaller screens using Flex Call. Next, to space everything out evenly within the card, we apply Justify Between, which separates items across the available space. We also want consistent horizontal padding, so we add PX12. To center everything vertically, we add Items Center. And since this card will be clickable, we want to make sure the cursor changes on hover, so we use Cursor Pointer. Finally, we smoothen any hover or click animations by adding Transition All and setting the animation speed with Duration 300. Perfect. Now let's continue building our Viki avatar card by adding some content inside. First, we're going to display the avatar's name. So inside the card's main div, we create another smaller div. And in this one, we simply write the name Viki. This will act as the title or label for the card. Right below the name, we want to show Viki's visual appearance using an image. So next we create a new div that will act as a wrapper or container for the image itself. Inside that container, we add our image element and link the actual image file. To do that, we go to the public folder of the project, then into the images subfolder, find the image called viki.png, and right-click to copy the relative path. We paste this path directly into the Asarc attribute of the image element so it can load properly when the site runs. Now to style the image container div, we give it a class name and apply a few Tailwind styles. We set a fixed width and height using W20 and H20. We give it a subtle background with BG Gray 850, which adds a slightly transparent dark background to help the image pop visually. We round the corners using rounded MD for a softer look. To make sure the image is perfectly centered inside the box, both vertically and horizontally, we use Flex, Item Center, and Justify Center. Finally, we add a MB2 for a bit of margin at the bottom, keeping everything spaced nicely. All right, now let's wrap up our avatar card design by adding the final touch, the star icons. These stars will represent the avatar's rating or skill level in a visual way. So to begin, inside the avatar card, we create one last div. This one will hold our star icons. Since we want the stars to line up next to each other horizontally, we set this div's display to flex. That way, each star icon will sit nicely in a row instead of stacking on top of each other. Now for the icons themselves, we're going to use a really handy and modern library called Lucid React. If you haven't heard of it, Lucid React is a React-based library that gives you access to a clean set of SVG icons. It's actually a fork of Feather icons, but it's community maintained and constantly updated. These icons are lightweight, open source, and super easy to style with Tailwind, which makes them perfect for our project. But before we can use them, we need to install the library. So open your terminal, and before doing anything else, make sure to stop the project if it's currently running. You can do that by pressing Ctrl-C. Once it's stopped, go ahead and type the command npm install lucid-react. Then hit enter. This will download and add the Lucid React library to your project. Once the installation is complete, you can start your project again by typing npm run dev. That will bring your site back up in the local development server so we can continue working live. Now that the library is installed, the next step is to import the icon we want to use. So scroll up to the top of your file and add the following import line. Import star from lu/react. This gives us access to the star icon component, and we can now use it just like any other React component. All right, now let's scroll back down to the section where we were building the Viki avatar card. We want to display a row of stars to represent how many stars the avatar has. In this case, Viki has a 3-star rating. We start by creating a temporary array using the spread operator with array 3. This is a quick way to tell React, hey, I want to do something 3 times. In this case, what we want to do 3 times is render a star icon. We then use the .map method, which is a standard way to loop through an array in React. Each time through the loop, we return a star icon. This is a component we're using from the Lucid React library. Even though the items in our array don't hold any data, we still capture the index as we loop through. We use this index as the unique key for each star. And this is important because React relies on these keys to track individual elements in the virtual DOM efficiently. Now, inside each star component, we apply a few Tailwind styles to make them look great. We set the width and height to 4 units each, giving us a small, clean, consistent icon. Then we give the stars a fill color of violet and match it with a violet text color, just to ensure consistency in appearance. Now, this whole approach might look a little fancy at first glance, especially if you're new to React. But trust me, this is actually one of the most efficient and scalable ways to create repeated UI elements dynamically. All right, now let's wrap up the Viki card with one final but very important touch, a visual highlight that shows which avatar is currently selected. This is going to instantly improve the user experience because the moment a card is selected, the UI will reflect it clearly with a glowing border around that card. We use a conditional render. That simply means we're telling React, only show this next element if the selected avatar is equal to Viki. This is a very common pattern in React. It allows us to dynamically change the UI based on the current state. And in our case, that state is which avatar is selected. Now, if that condition is true, we render a new div element. This div will act as the highlight, the visual indicator that Vicky is currently selected. Next, we make this highlight stretch across the entire card by using absolute positioning along with inset 0. That's a Tailwind shorthand for setting top, right, bottom, and left to 0. Then we give it a border 2 for thickness and a rounded LD to perfectly match the card's shape. We want it to sit on top of the card, but we also don't want it to block any mouse interactions. So we give it the pointer events none class. And just like that, when the user selects the Vicky card, it gets an highlight, exactly what we want in a modern React interface. All right, now let's move on to creating our second avatar card. We don't need to build anything from scratch. Instead, we'll reuse everything we already created for the Vicky card. Start by copying the entire Vicky card and paste it directly below the first card. Now we need to update the second version so that it reflects EVA's data, not Vicky's. To make this quick and efficient, we'll use Visual Studio Code's search tool. Just press Ctrl F, type the word Vicky, and it'll instantly highlight all the places where that name appears in the code. Now within the second card, the one you just pasted, go through and replace every instance of Vicky with EVA all in capital letters. That includes the displayed name, the alt text, any ARIA labels, and especially the image source path. Speaking of image paths, just renaming the image to eva.png might not always work, especially if the file name or its casing doesn't match exactly. To be sure, open your images folder inside the public directory, find the EVA image file, right-click it and choose Copy Relative Path. Then paste that directly into the image's source attribute. Next, let's update the star rating. Unlike Vicky, who had 3 stars, EVA is meant to have 4. Finally, let's make sure that the selection highlight, the glowing border we built earlier, works properly for EVA's card too. Instead of checking if the selected avatar is Vicky, this time we check if it's EVA. And before we wrap this part up, there's one small detail to clean up. Go back to the Vicky card, the first one, and update her displayed name to all caps, Vicky. And that's it. Both Vicky and Eva cards are now fully set up. Now that we've built both of our avatar cards, one for Vicky and one for Eva, it's time to make them interactive. We want users to be able to click on either card and instantly see that avatar's unique information update in real time. To do that, we'll use the onClick attribute, a built-in event handler in React that lets us run a function whenever an element is clicked. In our case, the element is the avatar card, and the function is the one we set up earlier, setSelectedAvatar. What we want is simple. When the user clicks on this card, we tell React that Vicky is now the selected avatar. So on the main container div of Vicky's card, that's the outermost wrapper around her name, image, stars, and highlight, we add the onClick attribute. Inside that, we call the setSelectedAvatar function and pass in the string Vicky in all caps. Now, whenever the user clicks that card, the state updates, and React automatically re-renders the interface using Vicky's data. Next, we do the exact same thing for EVA's card. But instead of rewriting the whole thing, let's be smart. Just copy the onClick handler from the Vicky card, scroll down to EVA's main container div, and paste it in. Then simply change the value from Vicky to EV. Again, make sure it's in all caps to match the keys we used in the avatar data object. And that's it. Now both avatar cards are fully wired up. Click on Vicky and her image, name, stats, and stars appear instantly. Click on EVA and everything updates to show her profile just as quickly. It's dynamic, responsive, and intuitive, exactly what we aim for in a modern interactive React UI. All right, now it's time to start building the right side of our avatar section. And this is where things get really exciting because we're about to introduce animation magic using Framer Motion. Eventually, this area will feature a 3D element, but for now, we're going to simplify things by starting with a smooth, animated slider using Framer Motion. And don't worry, if you've never used Framer Motion before, I've got you covered. We'll walk through everything step by step in the simplest and most approachable way possible. Let's begin by installing the library. First, open your terminal. Before installing anything, stop your development server by pressing Ctrl+C. Once that's done, type the command npm install framermotion, then hit enter. This will install framermotion into your project, unlocking a full toolkit of animation features that we can use right away. Once the installation is complete, let's bring the project back to life. Just type npm run dev and press enter again. This starts your development server back up and opens your live preview. Now that framermotion is installed, the next step is to import it into our component. So scroll up to the top of your React file, right where you typically import things like React, useState, or other hooks. Right there, we add this line, import motion from framermotion. That one line gives us access to everything we need from framermotion. Great. Now let's go ahead and set up our slider and the entire right section of the layout. This is where the 3D model or animated avatar will live. We want it to sit next to the stats and card section we just built on the left. So scroll down in your code and right below the main div that contains everything on the left side, we're going to create the right side container. We'll start by creating a new div element, and this will serve as the main wrapper for the right section. Now let's give this div a class name and style it with Tailwind CSS. The styles we'll apply here are relative, MDW4 on medium screens and up. This makes the right section take up half the width of the container. W full on small screens, it takes up the full width. MDH full on larger screens, we want this to stretch to full height. H80 on smaller screens, we give it a fixed height of 80 units. Flex item center, justify center. This centers anything we put inside both vertically and horizontally, making it perfect for a slider or animated visual. Overflow hidden. This hides anything that spills out, which is useful when you have sliding or animated content so nothing breaks the layout. Before we dive into complex 3D models, we're going to set up a basic animated slider using simple avatar images. We'll be doing this inside the right section of our avatar layout. Now here's the idea. We'll check which avatar is currently selected using a conditional statement. If the selected avatar is equal to Viki, we show Viki's image. Otherwise, we show EVA's image. This gives us a clean, efficient way to dynamically swap visuals based on user interaction. And now let's bring in the animation magic. Instead of using a regular div, we wrap each avatar image in a motion div. That's from framermotion. This is where the slide in and slide out effects happen. Inside each of these animated containers, we keep things simple, just a regular IMA tag. For Viki, we use the viki.png file. Let's break down how this works. Each avatar block is styled to be absolutely positioned and stretch across the entire container. Then comes the animation logic itself. We set initial to X 100, which means the image starts off screen to the right. We animate it to X though, smoothly sliding the image into the center of the section. And for the exit, we move it to X nan 100 cent, sliding it out to the left whenever we switch avatars. We also add a transition property setting the duration to half a second. This gives it that clean, modern glide, not too fast, not too slow. So up to this point, we've already created our animated avatar slider using motion.div from framermotion. When the selected avatar is Viki, we show her image with a slide-in animation. And if it's EVA, we swap in her image with the same animation pattern. We've already set that up using a simple conditional with the selected avatar state, so now we just need to make sure this logic is complete. To make this work, if the selected avatar is not Viki, we want to run the same animation, but instead of Viki's image and key, we'll use EVA. So what we do is change the key property from Viki to EVA for that block, and also swap the image to EVA's PNG. That's it. Now when the user clicks the avatar cards, we get that nice animated switch between the two images. But here's where we make things even smoother. Right now, when switching avatars, the previous image disappears instantly as the new one slides in. That feels a bit jumpy. What we want is for the old image to slide out first, then bring in the new one. And to do that, we're going to use a helper from Framer Motion called Animate Presence. Scroll up to the top of your file where we imported motion from Framer Motion. Right after that, we'll import Animate Presence. Make sure you've spelled it exactly like that since it's case sensitive and part of the core library. Now scroll back down to your slider section, the part where we check selected avatar and show either Viki or EVA, and wrap that entire logic inside an Animate Presence component. This wrapper tells Framer Motion to treat the conditional content as animated elements that can enter and exit with proper transitions. After wrapping, we'll add a little extra polish by giving Animate Presence a special prop, mode equals wait. What this does is tell it to wait for the exit animation to finish before bringing in the next element. And this tiny change makes the whole slider feel buttery smooth. Awesome. Now that our animated slider is fully working, it's time to really bring this project to life by replacing those placeholder images with actual 3D elements. And trust me, this is way easier than you might think, especially with the amazing tools we have today. Let's dive in. The first thing we want to do is open your browser and head over to Google. In the search bar, type Sketchfab, that's spelled Sketchfab. Sketchfab is an incredible online platform where creators and developers can upload, browse, and even download 3D models that you can preview directly in your browser. At the top of the page, you'll see a search bar. This is where you can look for anything. Let's try searching for cyber as an example, Cyber. Now, here's where we refine the results. We want to find models that are both downloadable and animated, since we're creating an interactive experience. Some of them will be paid, so keep an eye out for ones labeled free or that show no price. Once you find one that works, go ahead and click on it to open its model page. Now scroll down just a little and you'll see a download button. Click that. Sketchfab usually offers a couple of file formats when you download a model. If you're working with Three.js, the GL-TUF format is perfect. It's light, fast, and optimized for web-based 3D. But for this project, we're using Spline. So for Spline, the best format to choose is GLB. GLB is basically the same structure as GLTF, but packaged in a single binary file, and it uploads perfectly into Spline. One important heads up before you download: make sure the model's file size is under 60 megabytes. This is critical because the Spline editor doesn't support anything larger. It won't even let you upload it if it's over the limit. I've already prepared a model for this tutorial. So here's what we'll do. In the search bar, type Mira. You should see the model pop up in the results. Click on it to open the models page. Then scroll down a bit and look for the download button. Now, here's an important part. You'll notice there are two versions of the model in GLB format, one in 4K resolution and another in low resolution. While the 4K version might look slightly sharper, it comes with a big trade-off. The file size is too large. It'll slow down your website, and worse, Spline won't accept it. Remember, the maximum file size for Spline is 60 megabytes, and anything beyond that simply won't import. So always go with the low resolution version. Once the file is downloaded to your computer, we're ready to switch over to Spline, the powerful browser-based 3D design tool we're using for this project. If you don't already have an account, go ahead and sign up. The process is quick, easy, and completely free. Once you're logged in, click the Get Started button. That'll take you to your dashboard where you'll see the option to create a new project. Click the Create button, and from the available options, choose 3D Design. This opens up the Spline editor. At first, you'll see a basic 3D scene with a few default shapes or placeholders. Go ahead and delete those. Now we're ready to bring in our own model. Just drag and drop the Mira GLB file you downloaded right into the editor. Spline will automatically place the model into your scene. Make sure Mira is centered in the scene and not sitting too far off screen. Once that's done, click the Preview button at the top of the editor. And just like that, you'll see the animation playing, smooth and polished. It already looks amazing. But if you want to go a step further and enhance the presentation, we can add a few lighting effects and supporting elements to really elevate the scene. This part is optional, as I've already prepared the two 3D models we'll be using in this project. You can find the links in the description below. However, I'm going to show you how you can enhance the appearance of your model by adding lighting effects and making it fully responsive across different screen sizes. Let's continue with a subtle enhancement. From the top toolbar in Spline, click the ellipse button. Next, adjust your camera view so you're looking top down. Move the ellipse so it sits just beneath your 3D character. Then go to the right-hand properties panel and adjust the ellipse's width and height. The exact size depends on Mira's proportions, so tweak it until it feels balanced. Not too large, not too small. Now, follow along as I show you how to fix the materials of your 3D elements and add realistic lighting effects. After that, I'll walk you through how to make your model fully responsive on all screen sizes. Now that we've brought our 3D model into Spline, styled it with lighting, and added a clean visual base, it's time to take things to the next level by making the scene responsive. And while the lighting looks great and the animation runs smooth, you'll notice something right away. No matter how you resize the window, the model stays the exact same size. It doesn't scale down on narrow screens, and that's a problem, especially for mobile. So let's fix that. First, switch back into edit mode. Before we apply any responsive behaviors, we need to group everything properly. So select your 3D model along with any supporting elements you've added. That includes the spotlight, the point light, and the ellipse underneath the character. You can select them all by holding Control and clicking each one from the layer panel on the left. Once everything's selected, right-click and choose Group Selection. This bundles everything into a single unit, which makes it easier to scale and position consistently across screen sizes. Now with the group selected, look over to the right-hand panel and find the States section. Click on the plus button to create a new state. Let's say this one is for tablet devices. Now, press the plus button again to add another state, which we'll call State 2. This one will be for mobile devices. Remember, we also have the default base state already in place. By default, this is your base state, and we'll use it for desktop screens. Let's start here. Pull it slightly lower in the frame to balance the layout. Then zoom in a bit. Next, this one will be for tablets. In this new state, select the group and reduce its scale. Something around 0.65 works well. This gives it just enough breathing room on mid-sized screens like iPads and tablets without making it feel cramped or oversized. Now let's do one more. With this mobile state selected, reduce the scale further. Try something like 0.45. This size keeps the model visible while ensuring it doesn't dominate small screens. Now go ahead and hit preview again. You might be thinking, nothing looks different. And you're absolutely right. That's because while we've created responsive states, we haven't yet told Spline when to use them. Let's fix that. Select Group that holds your model and all its elements. Look at the right panel and find the option to add an event. Click it. This opens up a set of triggers and actions. Choose Start, then scroll through the list of actions and choose Screen Resize. This tells Spline to start monitoring the screen size from the moment your project loads. But we're not quite done. We still need to define what counts as desktop, tablet, or mobile, and which state should be used for each. Let's start by defining the condition for mobile devices. First, select the transition, then open the transition group. Just to be safe, make sure you've selected the correct group. Now, we'll say, if the screen width becomes smaller than 480 pixels, change the state from the current one to state 2 within 0.5 seconds, and that's it for mobile. Next, repeat the same process for tablets. This time, set the transition from the current state to the tablet state. Now move on to the custom mode. By default, it's set to custom. Change that to desktop. Again, follow the same process, but this time transition from the current state to the base state. Below that, you'll see an option labeled Add New Breakpoint. Click on it to create a new condition. Change the default value from custom to mobile, then switch less than to more than, and select the transition from state 2 to the tablet state. Create one more condition. Set it from tablet to more than, and this time select the transition from the tablet state back to the base state. That's it. Now you can close the panel and all changes will be applied automatically. Let's preview the model. Okay, the responsiveness is working great, but the model is slightly off to the left. Just play around with its position to center it properly. Now, the model is ready to use for our project. But don't worry if you're not using your own model. I've already prepared 2 models for this project, and you'll find the download and edit links right down in the description of this video. Go ahead and open the link for the EVA 3D model. Once it loads, you should see a Spline page with the model ready to go. At the top of that page, you'll see a button that says Duplicate File. Click that. This lets you create your own copy of the project so you can edit and export it however you like. Once it's ready, click Preview to check that everything looks good. Make sure the animation works and the model is centered. Now we're going to embed this model into our React app. From the top menu in Spline, select the Export option. This will open a side panel. First, choose Public URL. Right under that, click the Play Settings button. These are important settings that control how the model behaves inside our app. We won't be able to remove the Spline watermark unless you're on the paid version, but that's okay. What we can do is hide the background, disable page scrolling, and turn off panning. That way, users won't accidentally rotate or zoom the model. Once you've adjusted the settings, click the Update Public URL button at the bottom. This refreshes the link with your new settings. Next, switch to the Code Export tab. From here, you'll see an export panel with code snippets. Make sure the selected framework is set to React at the top. We want the correct format. The only part we care about is the Spline component. This is what will actually render our model inside our React app. Highlight that line and copy it to your clipboard. Just wrap it and press Ctrl-C. Now switch back to your code editor where you've been working on the React project. Before we can use this new component, we need to install the official Spline React package. So open up your terminal. If your dev server is running, stop it first by pressing Ctrl-C. Then paste in this command, npm install at splinetool/react-spline, and hit enter. Give it a moment to finish installing. It only takes a few seconds. Once the installation is complete, restart your development server so the project starts running again. Back in your React component, scroll up to the top of the file and add this import line. Import spline from @spline_tool/React spline. Make sure it's typed correctly. Capitalization matters, and so does the spelling. Now scroll down to where you're handling the avatar slider. You should already have image elements that were displaying Vicky and Eva as flat images. We're going to remove the image for Eva and replace it with the 3D model instead. So delete the image tag for Eva, and in its place, paste in the spline/component that you copied earlier from the export panel. That's it. Now head back to your browser and take a look. Your React app should now be rendering the interactive 3D model of Eva right inside your slider. It's alive, animated, and integrated smoothly with your motion transitions. And just like that, you've replaced a static image with a real-time, responsive 3D experience. That's a huge upgrade in terms of design and interactivity. Great job. All right, now that we've successfully embedded Eva's 3D model into our React project, it's time to do the exact same thing for Vicky. Just like before, I've already prepared this model for you. And you'll find the link right in the description of this video or tutorial. Go ahead and open it. Once the spline page loads, you'll see the Vicky model front and center, already aligned and animated. At the top of the page, click the Duplicate button. This gives you your own personal copy of the project, so you can export and tweak it however you like. Now for this one, do not move the model. Just click Preview at the top to confirm that everything looks good and that the animation is running smoothly. Next, just like before, head to the top menu and click Export. From there, choose the Public URL tab, open the Play Settings panel, set the following: hide the background, disable panning, turn off page scroll. Then scroll down and click Update Public URL. This applies the changes to the link we'll use in our app. Now switch over to the Code Export tab. Make sure React is selected at the top. Then copy the spline component from the code panel. This is what we'll embed directly into our React app. Back in your React project, find the spot where Vicky's image was being rendered. Go ahead and delete the image tag, then paste the spline/component you just copied right in that same spot. Save your changes. And just like that, both Vicky and Eva now have their own animated 3D models fully integrated into your website using Spline and React. It's an experience users can feel and explore, not just look at. Let's take a moment to test how this setup performs. Open your browser's responsive preview tool and check the layout on both tablet and mobile screen sizes. You should see that both models are scaling beautifully. They stay centered, they animate smoothly, and they respond perfectly to screen size changes. That means everything is working as it should, and it looks amazing. And that officially wraps up the avatar section of this project. All right, now we're moving on to a really fun part of the project. We're going to create an animated custom cursor using React, Tailwind CSS, and Framer Motion. This cursor will smoothly follow the mouse, change size, and even animate differently when we hover over interactive 3D elements. Let's break it down step by step so beginners can follow along with ease. So first things first, scroll up to the top of your component file, right below the import statements. That's where we'll define our custom cursor component. And I want to emphasize here, make sure you're following the code exactly, because even one small typo, like a missing bracket or wrong property name, could break the animation or cause bugs that are tricky to debug. Now, the component is set up to receive a prop called isHovering3D. This is a Boolean value that tells us if the cursor is currently hovering over a 3D model or not. That's important because we'll use it to control the look and behavior of the cursor dynamically. Inside the component, we define a piece of state called position using useState. And we initialize it with an x and y value set to 0. This state will store the current position of the mouse. Next, we create a reference called cursorRef using useRef. So right after you type useRef in your code, the editor will usually auto-import it from the React library at the top of your file. But sometimes that import won't happen automatically. And if you forget to do it manually, your code will break and you'll see an error like useRef is not defined or useRef is not a function. This gives us direct access to the cursor element in case we need to manipulate it later or do some fine-tuned control. After that, we set up a use effect hook. Again, make sure it is imported from the React library. And this is the part that lets us track the mouse position across the screen. Inside the effect, we define a function called handleMouseMove, which takes the event object and updates the position state with the current x and y coordinates of the mouse. We add this function as an event listener to the mouse move event on the document, so it works anywhere on the page. And don't forget to remove that event listener in the return function to clean up when the component unmounts. This helps avoid memory leaks or duplicated listeners. Here, I made a typo in the function's name. A simple mistake like this can prevent the program from running. Just be careful and always double-check your code. Now let's talk about the render part. We return a motion.div. This is a special animated div from Framer Motion. We attach our cursor ref to this element, and we give it several Tailwind classes. Make sure to use double quotes to wrap the Tailwind class names. It's fixed to the top left corner of the screen, has a high Z index so it stays above everything, disables pointer events so it doesn't interfere with clicks, and uses a mix blend mode to create that cool overlapping visual effect. For animation, we're animating its X and Y position based on the mouse coordinates. But here's the trick. We subtract a few pixels from each value to center the cursor on the mouse point. If the cursor is hovering over a 3D model, we offset it slightly less and we scale it up to 1.5 times its size. Otherwise, it stays at a normal scale of 1. These changes make the cursor feel responsive and alive. We also set a smooth spring transition with high stiffness and damping, which gives the cursor that buttery glide as it follows the mouse. Not too bouncy, not too stiff. Inside that motion.div, we have another motion.div, which is the visible part of the cursor. We give it a circular shape using rounded full and conditionally change its background color, violet if hovering a 3D model, or white otherwise. We also animate its size. When hovering 3D, it becomes smaller at 24 pixels. Otherwise, it's a larger 40 pixels, giving the illusion of depth and focus. Now here's the cool part. We also add a second animation layer, but only when is hovering 3D is true. It's another circular div absolutely positioned inside the cursor. This one has a border and violet color, and we animate it by scaling it up and fading it out in a loop. The scale goes from 0.5 to 2, and opacity gently transitions from 0 to zero point 0.5, and this animation repeats infinitely. That creates this glowing ring effect that pulses while hovering a 3D model. It's a small detail, but it adds so much interactivity and polish to your design. In the next step, we'll wire this cursor into the rest of our app and connect it to the characters section so it responds in real time when users interact with the models. Let's keep going. Scroll down to the section of your component where we started keeping track of which avatar is currently selected. This is the same part where we're using useState to manage things like which model is active or hovered. Now, right here, we're going to add a new piece of state. We'll write a line that creates a new state variable called cursor in model area. This state will help us track whether the user's cursor is currently inside the area that holds our 3D model. And it'll start off as false. Next, scroll down a little more to the part of your component where we've defined the logic for fetching or determining the currently active avatar, the Get Current Avatar Data section. Right below that constant, we're going to define two small helper functions. The first one is called handle 3D area mouse enter. When this function runs, we'll update our state by calling set cursor in model area true. This tells React, hey, the mouse is now inside the 3D model area. The second function is called handle 3D area mouse leave. And it does the opposite. It sets the state back to false, meaning the cursor has left that area. These two functions are super important because we'll soon attach them to our model container. All right, now that our custom cursor component is built, let's go ahead and plug it into the main part of our project. We're going to start by rendering it directly inside the avatar component. More specifically, we want to place it inside the return statement, right within the main container div that wraps this entire section. So right there, we call the custom cursor component and pass in a prop named isHovering3D. For the value of this prop, we pass our cursor in model area state that we created earlier. What this does is it tells our cursor whether it's currently hovering over the 3D model section or not. That way, the cursor can react visually, changing its color, size, and animation based on the user's interaction. Once you've done that, go ahead and preview your app in the browser. You'll notice the custom cursor now appears across the entire page and it's following the mouse movement just like we intended. But there's something missing. We don't yet see the cursor react when we hover over the 3D model section. So now let's fix that. Jump back to your code editor and scroll down to the part of your avatar component where we render the right side. This is the section that holds our 3D spline models. This part is super important because we need to detect when the user's mouse enters or leaves this specific area. Right on the outermost div that wraps your 3D model, we're going to attach two mouse event handlers, one for when the mouse enters and another for when it leaves. We'll use the onMouseEnter event to trigger our handle 3D area mouse enter function, and we'll use onMouseLeave to trigger the handle 3D area mouse leave function. These two handlers will toggle the cursor in model area state accordingly. Once that's added, save the file and go back to your browser. Try hovering over the 3D model area, and you'll see it. The cursor now changes when it enters that section. And that wraps up the custom animated cursor interaction. It's one of the more challenging but rewarding parts of the build. Nice job getting through it. In the next step, we'll build the arena section of the project, which includes a simple bento grid. First, go into your components folder and create a brand new file called arena.jsx. This will be a separate React component where we'll build our arena section. Inside this file, use the shortcut RAFC. That stands for React Arrow Function Component with Export. It automatically sets up a basic React component structure with the export default line already included. Now that the component is ready, let's connect it to the rest of our app. Head into your main app.jsx file where you're already rendering other sections like the hero or the characters, and write an import statement to bring in the arena component from the components folder. Once that's done, right below the character/component, insert the arena tag. Now back in the arena.jsx file, you'll see we still have a div with some placeholder text. Go ahead and delete that placeholder text, we won't be needing it. We're going to use that div as our main container for the arena section. Let's give this main div a class name with some Tailwind utility classes. These will handle spacing, responsiveness, and padding for us. MD min H 90% sets a minimum height of 90% of the viewport on medium-sized devices and up. P0 removes padding on smaller screens to keep things nice and compact. LP8 adds padding only on large screens, creating more breathing room when there's space available. MT0 removes top margin on medium and larger screens so it lines up cleanly. MT60 adds top margin for small screens to push this section away from the one above it. Inside this container, we'll now create the title section for the arena. Add a div, and inside that, place an H1 element with the text arena. This will be our section title. Next, let's style this heading using a combination of Tailwind and inline styles to make it really stand out. First, assign it a class name, text 5XL, font bold, tracking widest MB28. Then use an inline style object to apply a glowing text shadow effect. This makes the title pop and adds a bit of that modern futuristic look. And now it's time to position and style that title's wrapper div. So go ahead and give that div, the one holding the H1, a class name. We'll add 3 utility classes here. First, relative. Next, we apply Z10, which sets the stacking order. Finally, PT6 gives it some padding at the top, and text center simply centers the title horizontally. Perfect. The title is styled and positioned cleanly. Now, right below this title wrapper div, we're going to create a new div. This one is going to be the main container for our entire bento grid layout. Assign it a class name with several Tailwind classes that handle layout and responsiveness. W% ensures the grid stays at 90% width on all screen sizes, keeping things centered and breathable. MX Auto centers the grid horizontally in the middle of the screen. Then we set up the grid. Grid turns the div into a CSS grid container. Grid cols 1 means 1 column on small devices by default. MD grid cols 3 switches it to 3 columns on medium-sized devices and up, which gives us our responsive layout. Gap 4 and MD gap 6 set the spacing between grid items. A smaller gap for mobile and a slightly larger one for medium and larger screens. Now, inside this grid container, we'll begin building our left column, one of the 3 columns in our bento layout. So let's create another div inside the grid and assign it the following classes. MD colspan1 tells this column to only take up 1 out of the 3 columns on medium and larger screens. Space Y4 adds vertical spacing between child elements inside this column on small screens. Space Y6 increases that vertical space on medium-sized screens and up, just to give things a bit more room to breathe as the screen gets larger. This left column will contain 2 cards, and we'll start by building the first one right now. So let's begin by creating the outermost div for our first card. We'll give it a bunch of Tailwind classes to control its shape, layout, and hover behavior. First, we add relative. Next, we apply overflow hidden. We apply rounded 3XL to give the card those extra large, smooth, rounded edges. Then we add border and border white to give the card a nice, subtle white outline. For aspect ratio, we're using aspect 4.4, which means the width is a little wider than the height, a nicely balanced box shape. Finally, for interactivity, we use transform and transition transform duration 300 to animate any transformation changes smoothly. And we end with hover scale 105. So the card slightly zooms in when you hover over it, just enough to make it feel alive and responsive. Now that we have our card shell, let's build its content. Inside this card, we're going to create another div, which will hold both the background image and the button. This inner div is going to be absolutely positioned, meaning it will sit right on top of the card, taking up the full space. So we give this inner div the class absolute and set its width and height to full. Inside this content wrapper, the first thing we'll add is an image. Open your public folder, then go to the images subfolder and find the image file called bentocard-1png. Once you find it, copy its relative path and use that path as the source for your image element. This image will now act as the background of your card. Next, right below the image element, let's add a button. Inside this button, we want to include an icon and some text. To do that, we'll use boxicons. Now to get the icon working, we need to head over to boxicons.com. Once you're there, search for a shop icon, or any icon you like that represents a store. Select the font option and copy the HTML snippet it gives you. Head back to your project and paste that right inside your button element. And then right next to it, add the text NFT store. To make the button look sharp and polished, we'll apply some final Tailwind styles. Absolute bottom 0 places the button at the very bottom of the card. H16 sets the height of the button to a nice, clickable size. W full stretches it all the way across the card. BG black, BG opacity 70 gives it a dark, semi-transparent background. This helps the button stand out while still letting a bit of the image show through. Text 2XL font bold makes the text large and strong looking. Hover text yellow 400 gives us a nice highlight effect when we hover over the button. It glows yellow. Transition all duration 300 smooths out any visual changes so they feel natural. And finally, text now wrap prevents the text from wrapping onto a new line. And there you go. That completes our first bento card. In the next step, we'll create the second card in this column using a similar approach, but with slightly different content and layout. All right, let's move on to building the second card in the left column of our bento grid. We'll start by creating a new div right below the first card. This will act as the outer container of our second card. Just like before, we'll apply styles to shape it and make it interactive. Now inside this div, we're only going to add one element, a video. This video will cover the entire background of the card. Go to your public folder, then inside the videos directory, find the file named bentocard2.mp4. Copy the relative path of this file and use it as this RC for your video element. To make sure the video plays seamlessly and without user interaction, we'll add the following attributes to the video tag. Autoplay makes the video start playing as soon as it loads. Loop ensures the video plays continuously in a loop. Muted is necessary for autoplay to work in most browsers. Plays inline allows the video to play inline within the layout, especially important on mobile devices to prevent full screen takeovers. Finally, we want the video to cover the entire card area perfectly. So we give it a class name and apply these Tailwind styles. wfull makes the video stretch to the full width of the card. hfull does the same for the height. Object cover ensures the video fills the card completely while keeping its aspect ratio so it doesn't get distorted or stretched weirdly. And that's it. In the next step, we'll shift our focus to the right column of the bento grid, where we'll continue this modern layout with even more cool content. Let's keep going. We'll begin by creating a new div element. This will be the main container for the right column's content. We'll apply a few key styles to this div. First, m.colspan2 tells Tailwind that on medium screens and up, this div should take up 2 columns of the grid. Then we use space y4 to give vertical space between child elements on smaller screens and increase that space slightly on medium screens and up. Now inside this right column container, we'll start with the top row, which includes 3 small square cards sitting side by side. To hold these 3 cards, we need to create another div, and this one is a grid layout. Let's break down the styles for this wrapping div. Grid turns it into a grid container so the 3 cards can be laid out evenly. Grid cols1 is our mobile-friendly setting. It makes sure that on the smallest screens, the cards stack vertically, 1 per row. smgrid-cols3 tells Tailwind to switch to a 3-column layout starting at the small screen breakpoint. Gap4 adds spacing between the cards on smaller screens, and mdgap6 increases that spacing for medium screens and up. And now that our grid is ready, we can begin creating our first small card. We're going to start by creating a div element, which will act as the card container. Now let's walk through the styles we're applying. Relative is important because we'll be positioning content inside this card absolutely. Overflow hidden hides anything that spills outside the card. Rounded 3XL. Border adds a default border around the card, and we're using border white to make that border color white. Aspect square ensures that no matter the screen size, the card keeps a square shape. Transform enables transformations like scaling. Transition transform adds smoothness to those changes. Duration 300 sets the transition time to 300 milliseconds. And hover scale 105 makes the card scale up a bit when we hover, giving it a subtle zoom effect. Inside this div, we're going to add a video element that acts as the card's background. So go ahead and create the video tag. Then head over to your public folder, open the videos folder inside it, and look for a file named bentocard3.mp4. Once you find it, copy the relative path and paste it into the sarc attribute of your video element. We'll now apply a few essential video attributes. Autoplay means the video plays automatically as soon as it's rendered. Loop makes the video repeat continuously. Muted silences the video so it doesn't play sound. Plays inline allows the video to play inline on mobile devices instead of going full screen. Then we give the video a class name and style it to cover the entire area of the card. Use wfull and hfull to make it span the full width and height of the container, and object cover makes sure the video fills the space without distortion. Now, right below that video, we'll add inside h1 element to display the name. In this case, the name is Scoriox. This will be our card label. We'll style this h1 element with the following Tailwind classes. Absolute positions it over the video. Bottom 2 places it near the bottom edge. Left and half centers it horizontally. Then we apply transform translate x and half, which moves it left by 50% of its own width. This, together with left and half, ensures perfect centering. Z10 brings it above the video so it's visible. And finally, font extra bold text 2XL makes the text big, bold, and easy to read. All right, now that we've got our first small card done, let's move on and quickly create the second and third ones. Copy the first small card we just made and paste it right below inside the same grid. Make sure to indent your code properly to keep everything clean and readable. This will help a lot as your project grows and other developers work with your code. Once you've pasted the duplicate, we'll make a couple of changes to customize this second card. First, update the video source. So open your public folder, then navigate into the videos directory and look for the file named bentocard4.mp4. Copy the relative path of that file and then replace the src of the video element in this new card with that path. This ensures the video background for this card is different and matches the design we want. Next, scroll down just a bit inside that card and change the text inside the H1 element. Instead of Scoriox, type in Floralinks. That's the label or name for this second card. Great, that's card 2 done. Now let's repeat the exact same process for card number 3. Again, copy the second card and paste it right below. Now for the changes. Just like before, go back to your videos folder and this time look for the file called bentocard5.mp4. Grab its relative path and paste it into the src attribute of the video tag in this third card. Finally, update the H1 text one more time. Change it to Titanor. This gives us 3 visually consistent cards, each with a unique looping video and a bold name label to identify them. And just like that, we now have our 3 small cards complete. In the next step, we're going to build out the final card in this bento grid. So let's keep going. So directly below the container div that holds those 3 cards, we're going to create a new div element. This one will be the outer wrapper for our last card. Go ahead and give this div a class name with the following Tailwind styles. We'll make it relative for positioning, overflow hidden so content doesn't spill out, rounded 3XL to give it nice rounded corners, and border white to give it a subtle outline. Then we define the aspect ratio using aspect 69 for that wide cinematic look. We also apply MD:2 so it spans across both columns on medium screens and up. And of course, we add a hover animation with transform transition, transform duration 300, hover scale 102, so it subtly grows when hovered over. That's our card shell done. Now, inside this card, we're going to add an image element for the background. So navigate to your public folder, then open up the images directory and look for the image named bentocard.png. Copy its relative path and use that as the src for your image element inside this card. That gives the card its visual background. Right below the image element, we'll create a button. This button is going to contain an icon from boxicons.com followed by some text. So let's head over to boxicons.com, search for a link icon, and once you find one you like, make sure you select the font option. To style this button, we'll keep things consistent by reusing the styles from the button in our first card. So scroll back up to that first card's button, copy its entire Tailwind class list, and paste those styles into the class name of this new button. Everything stays consistent and clean. And that's it. We've now completed the entire arena section with a stylish and interactive bento grid layout. If we now go ahead and preview the site and resize the screen, you'll see that the layout remains beautiful and functional across all screen sizes, from mobile to tablet to desktop. So yes, it's fully responsive, and this section is officially done. Amazing work keeping up. All right, we're almost at the finish line. The last step to complete our project is building the footer section, and we're going to do this in a clean, component-based way, just like the rest of the project. So let's begin by heading over to the components folder, and inside it, create a brand new file called footer.jsx. Once that's created, go ahead and inside this file, type out RAFCE. That's our shorthand for quickly generating a React functional component structure. Next, we need to actually use this new component in our app. So let's navigate over to the app.jsx file. At the top, import the footer component from the components folder. Then scroll down to where your component tree is rendered and add footer to the bottom, ideally just after the arena or whichever component is last on your page. That way it appears at the end of the layout. Great, now the footer is wired up. Now let's go back to the footer.jsx file to start styling it. First thing, since this footer will include some icons from boxicons.com, instead of importing React at the top, we're going to bring in boxicons. Now let's work inside the return statement. Delete the existing outer div and instead create a footer element to wrap the whole thing. Inside this footer, we're going to add two image elements. The first image will be the project's main text logo. So open up your images folder inside the public directory and look for the file called ilutext.png. Copy the relative path to that image, then come back to your code and link it to the src of the first image element. Give it a height of 10 using Tailwind classes that'll keep it clean and proportionate. Now, below this first image, we'll add the second one. Again, go to your images folder. This time, look for the image named ilulogo.png and copy its relative path. Link it into the src of this second image element and set this one's height to 16. So first, right below that second image inside our footer element, we're going to create a new div. This div is going to act as a container for our social media icons. For layout, we'll apply some Tailwind utility classes that create a horizontal row with spacing between each icon, using flex to lay items side by side, and gap4 to give them some breathing room. Now let's move on to adding the icons themselves. We'll start by creating an anchor tag, which will be the clickable icon link. Inside this anchor tag, we'll add a social media icon, and we'll get that from boxicons.com. Go there, search for the Twitter icon, and once you find one you like, select the font option and copy the code they give you. Paste it right into the anchor tag. Next, let's style this anchor tag. We'll apply a few responsive and interactive Tailwind classes. Text 2XL for default size, but slightly bigger on medium screens with MD Text 3XL, and then we add a hover color effect with Hover Text Violet 600. Lastly, we smoothen the color transition with Duration 300. Now that we've built one, we don't need to rewrite everything. Just copy and paste this anchor tag 3 more times, so you end up with 4 total. For the other 3, all you need to do is change the icon inside each one. Head back to Boxicons, search for different icons, and replace the Twitter icon in each one with the new ones. This gives us a clean row of 4 clickable social icons. Now that the social icons are done, it's time to style the footer element itself. Give it a class name and apply the following styles. We want the layout to be flex, aligning all content centered vertically with item center and spaced out horizontally with justify between. Then we handle spacing. We give it top margin that adjusts based on screen size, LG M15% for large screens and MT 25% for smaller ones. We also add some vertical padding using Pi8 and horizontal padding that's responsive. Everything looks great so far, but now we want to make sure our footer is responsive. So let's take a second and check the layout across different screen sizes, especially mobile and tablet. And here's what we notice. On smaller screens, the second image in the footer looks a little off. It's taking up unnecessary space or maybe looks out of place. So to fix that, we go back to the code and target that second image, the one with the Ilu logo. All we need to do is apply a few responsive utility classes. Make it visible only on medium screens and above using MD inline, and hide it on small screens with hidden. This way, it stays clean and doesn't clutter the layout on mobile devices. And that's it. We've now officially completed this amazing project. A responsive, modern React website built with Tailwind CSS, fully structured with components, interactive elements, custom layouts, and smooth styling throughout. If you ran into any issues, or if something in my explanation wasn't fully clear, feel free to drop a comment below and I'll do my best to help you out. Thank you so much for following along. I hope you learned a lot and had fun. I'll be back very soon with another exciting project. Until then, take care and happy coding.